They welcomed him like he was one of their own. They gave him a bed, a seat at the dinner table, and their complete trust. They treated him like family, because as far as they knew, he was. But behind closed doors, something was happening that nobody in that house could have prepared for. Something quiet, something carefully hidden, something that, once it came to the surface, would tear two families apart in ways that could never be undone. This is the true story of Lillian and Jason, and I want to warn you right now, this one is going to stay with you for a very long time.
Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comment where you're watching from. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos.
Brian and Wendy Carter had built the kind of life that most people only dream about. Their home on the east side of Columbus, Ohio, was warm, organized, and full of life. Brian worked as a supervisor at a manufacturing plant, and Wendy was a school administrator. Together, they had been married for 11 years. They had a daughter named Brianna, 12 years old and full of energy, and a son named Little Brian Jr., who was only 6. From the outside, this family looked like a picture postcard, stable, loving, grounded in faith and hard work. Every Thanksgiving and every Christmas break, both sides of the family would gather at their home. It was a tradition that had been going on for years. Wendy's younger sister Sandra would come up from Atlanta with her daughter Lillian. Brian's parents would come down from Cleveland, and sometimes Brian's younger brother Derek would come along too. The house would be full of laughter, home-cooked food, and the kind of warmth that only happens when people truly love each other. At least, that's what everyone believed. That particular December, the holiday break started the same way it always had. Sandra arrived with Lillian 2 days before Christmas. And Lillian, well, Lillian walked in with that quiet, reserved smile she always had. She was 16 years old, tall, slim, with big dark eyes that always seemed to be thinking about something far away. She was a junior in high school back in Atlanta, a straight-A student who wanted to study nursing one day. Every adult in that family adored her. That same weekend, Derek arrived. He was Brian's younger brother, 19 years old, a sophomore in community college in Cleveland. He was helpful around the house, always offering to carry things, wash dishes, fix something that was broken. Brian trusted him completely. Wendy trusted him too. He was family. He was safe. He was welcome. Nobody in that house could have imagined what was coming.
Let's talk about who Lillian really was, because to understand this story, you need to understand her. She was not a reckless teenager. She was not a troublemaker. She made good grades. She went to church every Sunday with her mother, Sandra. She didn't have a boyfriend, not because she wasn't pretty, but because Sandra had always told her that her education came first, and Lillian had taken that seriously. But underneath all of that brightness, Lillian carried a loneliness that nobody around her fully understood. Her parents had divorced when she was 10, and her father had drifted out of her life slowly but surely after that. She smiled a lot, but the smile sometimes had a weight behind it that only the most observant person would catch. And then there was Jason, the name we'll use to protect identities in this story. Jason was not the kind of young man that anyone would flag as dangerous. He was polite, he was respectful to his elders, he held the door open, he said please and thank you, he helped clear the table after dinner without being asked. He was 3 years older than Lillian, but in that holiday environment, surrounded by family, nobody thought twice about that. What nobody noticed was that Jason was lonely in his own quiet way too. He had grown up in Brian's shadow, always being compared to his older, more successful brother. His self-esteem was quietly fragile in ways he never let anyone see. And for the first time in a long time, someone was actually paying attention to him. That someone was Lillian. They were both young, both vulnerable, both carrying things that nobody else in that house knew about. It started with small things that, looking back, Wendy would say felt off, but that she told herself she was overthinking. The first thing she noticed was that Lillian was staying up past midnight. This was unusual. Lillian had always been the first one to say goodnight, but now she was staying downstairs long after everyone else had gone to bed.
And when Wendy got up one night to get a glass of water, she heard two voices in the living room, very low, almost whispering. She peeked around the corner and saw Lillian and Jason sitting on the couch together, close together, talking in a way that made Wendy pause for just a moment before she turned around and went back to bed. She told herself it was nothing. They were young. They were probably just talking about school or music. But it happened again the next night and the night after that. Then Wendy noticed that Lillian had started spending an unusual amount of time on her phone, texting quickly and then turning the screen face down whenever anyone walked into the room. Sandra noticed the mood changes too, but she attributed them to teenage stress and let it go. Then there was the afternoon that Brian came home early and found the house unusually quiet. The kids were at a neighbor's. Sandra was at the grocery store. Wendy was napping upstairs. Brian called out for Jason. No answer. He walked toward the guest room. The door was closed. He thought nothing of it, but on his way back through the hall, he noticed the guest bathroom door was also closed, and he heard, very faintly, the sound of a whispered conversation before everything went quiet. He stood there for a moment. Then he told himself he was being paranoid and went to make a sandwich. But that uncomfortable, low-level feeling in his stomach didn't go away.
The holiday came and went. By the time New Year's arrived, the family had celebrated together, and 2 days into January, Sandra packed up the car, said her goodbyes, and drove back to Atlanta with Lillian. Jason left for Cleveland around the same time. Life returned to normal at the Carter house, or at least it seemed to. But in Atlanta, something was happening. Slowly at first, then faster than anyone could have imagined. About 6 weeks after she got home, Lillian started feeling sick in the mornings. She told herself it was the flu. Then it happened again and again. She started feeling exhausted at school in a way that was different from normal tiredness, a deep, bone-heavy fatigue she couldn't shake. She stopped eating lunch at school. Her teachers noticed she wasn't herself. Her closest friend, Keisha, asked her one afternoon if she was okay, and Lillian said yes, but her hands were trembling slightly as she answered. Sandra noticed Lillian was no longer coming downstairs for dinner most evenings, the dark circles, the flinching when anyone asked how she was feeling. Sandra made a doctor's appointment, not for a pregnancy test, just a general checkup. She was not prepared for what she was about to be told. They sat in that small examination room, Sandra in the chair beside the bed, Lillian on the crinkly paper cover of the exam table, staring at the floor. The doctor came back in after running the initial tests. He sat down. He looked at both of them, and then he said the words that made the air leave the room. Lillian is pregnant. She appears to be about 8 to 9 weeks along. Sandra did not speak for almost 30 seconds. The sound of the clock on the wall seemed very loud in that moment, the hum of the fluorescent light above them, the muffled sound of voices in the hallway outside. And then Sandra said, very quietly, "What?" The doctor repeated himself. Sandra turned to her daughter and said, "Lillian, look at me." Lillian slowly looked up, and her mother saw something in her face she had never seen before. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't defiance. It was pure, absolute terror. Can you imagine being in that room? How do you think Sandra felt in that moment? What would you have done?
They drove home in silence. Sandra gripped the steering wheel so hard her knuckles were pale. When they got inside the house, Sandra sat Lillian down at the kitchen table. She didn't raise her voice. She spoke very carefully, very deliberately, the way a person speaks when they are using every ounce of self-control they have left in their body. "Lillian, I need you to tell me who did this. I need you to tell me right now, and I need you to tell me the truth." Lillian shook her head slowly. She started to cry. Not loud, dramatic crying, but the quiet kind. The kind that comes from somewhere very deep inside a person. The kind that doesn't make any sound at first, just tears rolling silently down a face that is trying very hard to hold itself together. "I can't," she whispered. "You can," Sandra said, "and you will."
Several minutes passed. The kitchen clock ticked. Sandra waited. She didn't move. She didn't look away from her daughter's face. And finally, Lillian opened her mouth and said a name so quietly that Sandra almost didn't hear it. Jason. Sandra stared at her. What? Jason, Lillian said again, slightly louder. Brian's brother. The silence that followed that name had weight. It had heat. Sandra stood up slowly, walked to the kitchen counter, and stood there with her back to Lillian for a long moment. When she turned around, her face had changed entirely. Jason, the quiet, polite, helpful young man who had sat at their dinner table, who had said grace before the Christmas meal, the same boy who had been sleeping under Wendy's roof while all of this was happening.
Sandra called Wendy that same night, and the moment Wendy heard her sister's voice, just the tone of it, just the way Sandra said, "Wendy, I need to tell you something," Wendy sat down on the edge of her bed and braced herself, because when a mother calls her sister with that voice, she already knows that whatever is coming is going to change something permanently. Wendy confronted Jason. She called him first. He denied it. He said Lillian was lying, that nothing had happened. His voice was steady, but there was something underneath it that Wendy recognized as panic. She knew what a cornered person sounded like. She told him very clearly that a pregnancy had been confirmed medically and that the family needed the truth. Brian found out that evening when Wendy told him after the children had gone to bed. He sat completely still on the couch as Wendy spoke. He didn't interrupt. He didn't react outwardly at first. And then, very slowly, he stood up and walked out the back door and stood in the yard in the cold night air for almost 20 minutes. When he came back inside, his jaw was set and his eyes were red. He picked up his phone and called his brother. The conversation between Brian and Jason lasted less than 5 minutes. By the end of it, Jason had broken down. The denial crumbled. He admitted that yes, something had happened during the holiday visit. He said he was sorry. He said he hadn't meant for any of this to happen. Brian hung up the phone without saying another word. Sandra reported the situation to authorities in Atlanta. Jason was 19. Lillian was 16. The law was clear. Charges were filed. Jason's parents were contacted. The shock and shame that spread through that extended family was immediate and devastating. There were screaming phone calls, accusations flying in every direction, people who didn't believe Lillian at first, which caused her a pain she would carry for a very long time. People who blamed Sandra, people who blamed Wendy, and two families that had once gathered around a Christmas dinner table who now could barely stand to say each other's names. Word spread to the school community in Atlanta. Lillian walked into school one Monday morning and felt every eye in the hallway on her. By lunchtime, the whispers were everywhere. She sat alone in the cafeteria that day, with her tray untouched in front of her, staring at nothing, while the world she had known completely caved in around her. In the months that followed, Lillian's life was restructured entirely. Sandra withdrew her from her school and enrolled her in a different district. She began seeing a therapist, a kind woman named Dr. Patricia Owens, who specialized in adolescent trauma. Their sessions were slow at first. Lillian barely spoke in the beginning, but over time she began to open up. She began to name what she was carrying: the shame, the confusion, the loss of the future she had imagined for herself, the anger, because yes, there was anger, deep, complicated anger that Lillian herself didn't fully understand for a long time. The pregnancy was one of the most difficult periods of Lillian's young life. She was 16 years old, carrying a child inside her body, grieving the version of herself she thought she was going to become. Sandra supported her through every step. She went to every appointment. She sat beside Lillian through every hard conversation. She rearranged her entire life to make sure her daughter was never alone in any of it. That kind of love, fierce, unrelenting, refusing to abandon, is the kind that doesn't always get talked about, but it mattered more than any words can describe. Jason faced legal consequences. Given the age difference and Lillian's minor status, charges moved forward. He could not return to campus. His relationship with Brian was, for all practical purposes, over. Brian did not speak to Jason for years afterward. The bond between those two brothers, built over a lifetime, had been broken in a way that neither of them would ever fully recover from. Wendy struggled with guilt for a long time. She kept replaying those late nights, the whispered conversations, the moments where something had felt wrong and she had talked herself out of pursuing it. Her therapist helped her understand that she was not responsible for what had happened, but guilt doesn't listen to logic. Lillian gave birth to a daughter in late September. She named her Amara, and the moment Lillian held that baby, tiny, perfect, completely innocent, something shifted inside her. Because Amara hadn't asked for any of this, she only knew the warmth of her mother's arms. And Lillian looked down at that face and made a quiet, internal promise. This child would not grow up in the shadow of what had happened. This child would be raised in love. Period. 2 years later, Lillian returned to school on a different track, working toward her GED, then enrolling in community college with plans to study healthcare. Her therapist once said, "Sometimes the path gets rerouted. That doesn't mean the destination disappears." Lillian wrote that down and put it on the wall of her bedroom where she could see it every morning. The two families have never been the same. The holiday tradition quietly ended. There are no more Christmas gatherings with both sides around the same table. The warmth that used to fill that house in Columbus in late December, that warmth is gone, and it took one holiday season to destroy something that had taken more than a decade to build.
Think about what you just heard. Think about Lillian, 16 years old, bright, ambitious, loved. Think about Sandra, who had done everything a mother is supposed to do, and who still found herself sitting in a doctor's office, hearing news that no parent ever wants to hear. Think about Wendy, who had opened her home with nothing but kindness and trust, and who carried guilt that was never really hers to carry. And think about Brian, a man who loved his brother, who had invited him into his home, and who had to watch that love get used as a cover for something that destroyed his family's peace. There is no clean ending to a story like this. Life doesn't always wrap itself up with a bow. But what we can take from Lillian's story is this: young people are vulnerable in ways that adults often miss, even when those adults are trying their hardest. The loneliness that a teenager carries can make them reach for connections in places and with people they are not safe. And the environment we create, the lack of boundaries, the assumption that family automatically means safety, those things matters more than we like to admit. One holiday visit, one collection of late night and whispered conversation, one secret that grew until it was impossible to contain, and two families changed permanently. So let me ask you something before you go. Do you think families are cautious enough when it comes to mixing young people together in shared spaces, even when those young people are relatives? Do you think enough conversation are being had about boundaries and supervision? If this had been your family, if Lillian had been your daughter, your sister, your niece, what would you have done differently? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Tell me what this story made you feel. Tell me where in the world you're watching from, because this community is global and every single voice here matters. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you're new to this channel, subscribe now so you never miss a story like this. We tell the story because awareness saves lives. Take care of yourself, take care of the young people around you, and we'll see you in the next one.